welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. If you guys are joining us live, happy Wednesday afternoon. If it's not live, probably happy some other day and time. Vlad and I are super excited to go get into our next theme. So we've got this theme coming up, and then we've got ICC, and Vlad and I will be at ICC, and we'll be streaming at ICC and having a number of awesome conversations there. And this theme, we're really excited about. It's about systems integration, and longtime listeners will know just about every year of the past 6 years, Vlad and I have done a theme around systems integration. This year, like most years, we want to get a little bit more specific, and we want to talk about building a systems integrator and the different steps and processes of building a systems integrator. We've got Dylan, who will go ahead and reintroduce in just a minute, who's going to go talk about the first year or maybe a little bit less of Abelara and what they've been doing. And then we've got several other folks who are coming on at various stages of we've been in business for 20 plus years, and we are much larger or much smaller and a little bit of everything in between. And so we are super excited to go ahead and do that. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new, every week, Vlad and I have an awesome conversation with someone else within the automation and manufacturing space. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, mockeries, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. Those are some of our favorite things to do. So be sure to say hi to Dylan. Let us know what you're doing. If you've got questions for Dylan or Vlad or myself, please feel free to go ahead and let us know, and we will do our very best to answer them. Dylan is a super technical guy. He's probably going to go take us down some really awesome pieces of conversation. If some of your questions are too technical, we will do our very best to answer them after off stream. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub episode 270. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad, and we'd like to welcome Dylan back to Manufacturing Hub. Dylan, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Dylan, thank you for joining us once again, and of course, taking the time to have the conversation. For those who are unfamiliar with, obviously, some of your work, I know that you are quite active, I would say relatively active in the LinkedIn space. Could you give us a reintroduction, please, but also talk to us a little bit more, obviously, on the Abelara side, what you guys are doing today. I see Frank has also mentioned your book, so tie in all of those components for us, please.
Yeah, I think the full introduction, we can go back to the past episode, but the quick introduction here is started off with robots and PLCs and things like that, jumped into SCADA and HMI, and eventually followed customer requests up the stack, did more SCADA work, did some MES work, did a bunch of recipe management and MES type stuff, and then got into ERP integrations and back up and down that stack a few times. So we had a few projects in the past where we were doing everything from the electrical design, MCC sections, panel builds, controls, all the SCADA, HMI, and recipe management and MES functions as well, full turnkey. And on those types of projects, we learned a lot. That's kind of the brief version. But from there, we found a lot of the similar patterns, a lot of common failure points, where a lot of projects went right, where a lot of projects went wrong. And what I didn't like about a lot of the systems integration model, the business, and just how things are conducted. So eventually started Abelara. Originally, we kind of swore that we wouldn't be an integrator, that we were doing consulting and architecture and things like that. But the market takes you where it takes you, and you can only tell customers no so many times before you have to give in. So we're an integrator now. We do implementation services on top of the architecture and all that. And it's been quite the journey, but we'll get into more of those details in the next hour, it sounds like. So I'll leave that there.
Yeah, Dylan, let me ask you a follow-up right on what you just mentioned, which is, again, at least earlier in my career, I didn't necessarily know what the definition of a systems integrator was because I started off at an end user. So for those in the audience who may not be familiar with the term as we start the month of August on the theme, could you define and describe, I would say, as best as you can, what is a systems integrator?
I mean, there's different flavors. You're probably going to get 10 different answers through the course of 5 conversations or however many more you've got in the series here. But at the end of it, if you go to like kind of the first principles, it's a outside party, usually a third party. There are some large organizations, end users, manufacturers who have internal integrators. But we'll leave that aside just for the sake of simplicity. It's usually a third-party company that comes in, and integrates something to something else. So on the OT side, it might be a PLC or a robot to VFDs or pneumatic systems. It could be writing controls and integrating the process. There's other types of systems integrators that do more of the SCADA stuff. They might still do controls, but they're doing more of SCADA, building automation and things like that. You get into your MES layer, you start getting more into the IT realm. You've got integrators that integrate business systems and logic and execution. You've got systems integrators that integrate the ERP system to other business systems. There's so many different methods and ways of doing it, but the common core of all of those is just somebody comes in, some team comes in and helps you integrate one system to another or many to many. But they're integrating systems that were previously isolated, right?
And let me ask you a follow-up before I pass the mic back over to Dave, right? What is the secret sauce of an integrator? What is the ultimate asset? You know, when we talk about maybe the companies that develop software and hardware, I think it's a little bit more obvious, but when we talk about systems integrator, what is the ultimate asset that is valued for them?
Yeah, I think there's two different types of system integrators with two very different answers there. There's one type of system integrator where their big value add to their customer is jack of all trades. They know how various things fit together, and they've worked with 100 different platforms on 100 different facilities, maybe 1,000 different facilities, and they've seen the patterns of what does and what doesn't work. They've got that domain knowledge, but it's in a wide breadth of things, right? Jack of all trades, a master of some, but they know how things play together. That very orthogonal thinking of how does this affect this and how does that affect that, and with a lot of the lived experience. Then there's the other type of systems integrator, which they have an equally valuable value proposition depending on what you're looking to get out of an integrator, right? And those integrators are your specialists. So those are the ones that are usually partnered with a single software company or two, and they just do XYZ implementations all day long as their primary product and their project structure. And they're going to be some of the best people on any given platform because all they do is that platform for 1,000 customers over and over and over again. They know it inside and out. They've got the relationship. They know the details. They get the best tech support. They've got the relationships and the politics and the domain knowledge of that product. So you've either got integrators that go deep into one thing, or you've got integrators that go wide. And depending on if you need help kind of designing and architecting and knowing how to integrate things, you might want one. But if you already know what you're trying to do and you just need to make this product work or build something in this specific tool, then you're going to want that specialist. A lot of times they coexist on projects too. A lot of times you'll have some of each depending on the needs of that specific project for the same customer or even the same site. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Appreciate it. Dave, thoughts, comments, concerns?
No, I think that's really good. I think that's really good. And that is an angle I suppose we didn't talk about a little bit at the beginning. I know, Dylan, we'll talk about kind of your positioning with Abelara. I guess we're probably going to have a wide variety of different positioning in here with the groups that we're going to talk about this month. And to your point, Dylan, I feel like both groups, both sides, all sides are needed in the ecosystem of let's go determine what our end user wants to build or create and how do we go pick the correct technology stack to allow them to be successful today and for X number of years in the future. And then those may or may not be the groups in order to go ahead and build and deploy or deploy past the first round of some of those pieces of software as some of these groups get deeper and deeper into the different platforms. So I think that is really interesting. And thank you for that, Dylan. I guess let's go jump into you, right? Yeah. And I want to dig into kind of the reason why you started and created Abelara. And as we're talking about that, I will let our listeners know if you have run an integrator or have considered running an integrator. It seems to me, in many times in engineer or an integrator's life, they reach the point where they are the senior in some sort of position that they're in, and it becomes I wonder if there's the opportunity for me to do it my way, or perhaps it becomes for the uninitiated, people who don't necessarily respect the time and effort it takes to sell and market and do the accounting and all of those other back end pieces of support, and go out on their own. So Having said that, and with a bit of that preamble, Dylan, can you tell us what made you want to create Abelara? What were those motivating and driving factors for starting?
Yeah, and I think for me personally, I know my business partner Glenn had his reasons as well, but for me personally, I'll speak to that, is I spent a decade plus at a systems integrator or two.
Mm-hmm.
We did our thing. I spent a lot of those years at one. When I started there, it was just some PLC, some control stuff. We were supporting electrical projects for an electrical contractor, and we were just kind of building out those projects as we went. Mm-hmm. And over the course of the years there, we ended up with a dozen or more employees in the engineering department doing integration work, a lot of controls engineers and things like that. We were doing a lot of ignition work at the time, some Rockwell work, things like that. Mostly PLC SCADA, but getting really deep into some MES stuff for specific customers as well. And through the course of that, by the end of my time there, I was kind of managing and running on most of pretty much every project that came through that team in one way or another. Mostly from a technical standpoint, I had some of my own projects. I had some employees, they had their projects. I was doing a lot of the technical stuff for them. And that said, when we were doing projects for the electrical side of the department or the other team within the business, we weren't necessarily doing the projects that we were best at or the projects that we were really trained for. And things were already kind of determined what they would be before they got to us from a sales perspective. And through various things through that, ended up kind of getting burnt out, went to another integrator for a while, helped build up their controls team there, did some PLC projects and things with them before starting Abelara. But Abelara was years in the works before I started Abelara proper. Before we had a name for it, we knew what was coming and knew something was going to be done and we were going to build something. So there's a lot of years living in, working in, building, growing, with the integrators that I worked for, with the integrators I worked with, the teams that I managed and ran. But also during those times, a lot of this isn't working. Why? This is working really well, but why aren't other people doing it? And so while I was in that position, I was also spending a probably unhealthy amount of hours talking to other systems integrators, researching the field, other integrators that had come and gone, some that got really big and fell, others that kind of stayed small but had been around for decades, and some that got into the 500 or 1,000 employees, and trying to identify kind of where the different inflection points were in their growth story. Where are the risk points? Where are the danger points? What did they do differently than what we're doing now? What are we doing differently than that? And all of that, both lived experience, all that controls engineer, the management, all the team stuff there, as well as all that research and those conversations with various people in the industry and just historical record, kind of led and laid the groundwork for what would be Abelara going forward there. But with that, I was kind of completely burnt out of integration. I'd done a lot of controls work. It's a lot of late nights, a lot of after-hour startups, things like that, emergency support, and I kind of got burnt out of that whole thing. So when we started Abelara, it was mostly just going to be consulting, architecture support, training, and we weren't going to do much of the implementation piece just because that's what I had been burnt out on before. But after doing enough of those consulting pieces, putting the architecture together, somebody has to implement them. And we did a couple of them with other integrators. Some went really well, some went sideways, but not having that in our control usually led to problems down the road. And we had some customers who want third parties, and we still work very well with them on just a consulting capacity. But we also have customers who are like, hey, you designed this, we need you to build it. We don't want to hand off, we just want you to keep going. So we started following that down through there, hired a few engineers, built the integrator up, and growing the team. So, yeah.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that front, Dylan. Obviously, there's a lot of questions, right? But I want to start from the very beginning, but also referring back to what you've mentioned, which is, choosing platforms and selecting, I guess, customers, or being selective and saying no sometimes yes. So the question that I have for you, right, and without naming the obvious names, and people can obviously go to your profile and see the companies you're working with, but as you were starting out, right, were you selecting the companies you want to explicitly partner with, right? As opposed to that finding customers and then allowing them, in many instances, they already have a preconceived notion of what they would like to deploy, right? And I think that choice, even with medium-sized integrators is very often non-trivial, right? So I guess like I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, as you were starting, were you very explicit to go and find the partners and the software and hardware solutions and then bring them to the manufacturers, or was your approach more, let's find, the projects and the work and then allow them to an extent like point us in the right direction?
Yeah, so with Abelara specifically, but just as a general philosophy, even beyond that, is I always start with the customers. So the early customers we had with Abelara, we were on the consulting side. So the ones that came to us were mostly naturally gravitating towards we want to do digital transformation. We want to connect the shop floor. We haven't even purchased network switches yet. We're starting from ground zero. How do we even get started? What does this look like? How do we even build something that seems so big, right? So a lot of people are just overwhelmed by this need to transform without really knowing what that meant. And so we kind of started there, and a lot of it was just change management and business process, right? Mapping the business top down, bottom up, but also left to right with order to cash, and how do you operate as a business? Because every single company, even in the same verticals, even making the exact same thing, runs a little bit differently than the other ones. Everybody says they're the same as everybody else. Everybody says they're unique in different ways, but the truth is they're somewhere in the middle of those. So trying to figure out exactly, most of our customers up front were, hey, we need to transform, we need to connect this thing. We've got these types of PLCs. We may already have a SCADA system. We might have nothing. And how do we put that together? But then on the IT side, they always had something. They always had an ERP that was existing. They might have had some integration software up there, other teams or not. And so it's, what is the existing state? So even if there's no OT stuff there, there's other business software in place. So talking about the integration side from earlier, there's a large breadth of what is integration of what software exists. And so on the breadth side of this, the jack of all trades, we kind of know how each of those exists. So everything from your PLM to your CMMS, your ERP, your recipe management, down to the PLCs and the controllers and the SCADA, the HMI systems down there. How do those play together down here? How do those play together down here? But how do you bridge those connections in the real world? And that was a daunting task for a lot of the customers. So most of ours gravitate on that front end. We don't know how to do this yet, but we have an idea of where we want to go. They had a business objective. They had an outcome, something we could put an ROI to be able to get budget approval with their teams and find them a solution that actually made sense. And then once we figured out what their need was, what already existed, what didn't, what are they trying to integrate and why, then we could start to select the software packages and vendors that meet their needs specifically, right? So there's a handful we usually end up coming back to because they're good tools, but every single architecture we've done has been slightly different than something else because this already existed or this function wasn't needed. And this platform might do this the best, but this, or this, and maybe there's a better fit for function thing there, and all these little dependencies on. So our early days are most of our customers. That was a long way of saying we're kind of towards that. We just need help figuring out how to get started, right? We know we need to do something. We have a business outcome we're trying to get to, but we don't even know where to start executing. And so that's where the consulting really came in. The other side of that is, as you said, there's a lot of customers and a lot of manufacturers out there who know they want to build something, right? They say, hey, we already bought this package. We've been sold on this thing. We need to build X inside of Y software, right? And when that's in packages we know really well, or when that's in things that we do go deep on, because while we go wide on a lot of things, there are certain stacks we go deep in platforms and tools. And when we're the best fit for that, in our opinion, then we'll bid the true integration project without having to do that whole discovery phase. But the truth is most clients are somewhere in the middle. So that's where that brownfield piece of that consulting usually is still the starting point. But not always. Sometimes you have very mature clients who have already done all that and they just need to build something in their stack. So
interesting. Yeah. And like I said, it is a question that at least I've spoken to many integrators that they struggle with, mm-hmm. right? Again, I think it's a challenge not only when you're starting out, but also when you're looking to grow and when you're looking to maybe specialize or focus in a specific area. And a lot of times, again, it seems, at least in our industry, the customers would obviously pull you in a direction that you didn't necessarily intend to go, right? Because as you said, mm-hmm. Many of them already have pre-established tools I, on a brief side note, right, had the question of delta V very recently, and in almost all cases, you will never be able to, at least at the stage that I'm in, tell a conglomerate pharmaceutical company, hey, let's use a different platform because that's what we're used to, right? It's an immovable object, so to speak. So at that point, you need to decide, are we going to follow the customer, or will we focus on priorities that do work with the tools that we're looking for? As a follow-up, the other dilemma, again, and you've talked a little bit about this, but the distinction between consulting and integration, right? And I want to maybe take a step back and maybe make a distinction between the two before we move forward, because I think that sometimes they're bundled together. Sometimes there's maybe how would I say, not necessarily, what's the word that I'm looking for? People don't necessarily like consultants, and again, we can talk as to why. But when you say, like consultant / integrator, what are you consulting on in our space specifically, and how do you delineate what's consulting work versus what is integration work?
Yeah, so on the consulting side specifically, it's a lot of that architecture. It's a lot of change management. It's a lot of buy-in. It's a lot of much more executive-facing work. So it's a lot more VPs, directors, and C-suite level roles that we're working with on the front end side to figure out what is the business process. Why are we? So when somebody comes and said, "Hey, we need digital transformation. We need a UNS," my first question is always why. And pulling that string of why do we need this? Why do we want this? What's the business outcome? What's the strategy? What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? And then how does what we build on the plant floor or in the business side, on the IT side, how does what we build or integrate support that goal, right? Mm-hmm. And finding that goal, that's where we get a lot of our upfront buy-in. It's a lot of change management. It's a lot of discovery. It's a lot of business processes. In some cases, we're defining them for companies that haven't had them at all. They've never really defined what is their process, what are their gates, how are they building something, how are they designing something, how are they selling it, and why, right? That's definitely on that consulting side. And then on the integration side, we're building something, we're integrating something, we're writing code, or we're building in a platform, or we're installing a tool to do a thing, right? An actual outcome-based objective, like we're building something to do something. Connecting and programming integration or things like that. On the consulting side, it's a lot more, all right, you want digital transformation, but what does that mean, right? What is the outcome for the business? Are you trying to increase revenue, increase quality? Are you trying to, you know what I mean? Just so many different things on the business side. What we say a lot is, what is your North Star, right? What are you trying to go to as an entire organization? And how do we tie that all together? So, and then, on the integration side, we're genuinely building something. And I think the secret thing that we bring together as Abelara is that combination of how do we tie those two things into each other, right? And how do we make sure that one leads to the outcomes? But yeah.
Absolutely. Dave, thoughts?
No, I appreciate that, Dylan. And how do I want to say? I think for me, sadly, the vast majority of groups that I've worked with, from Fortune 50 to 50 people, don't really ask the question why. And especially in the last 8 or 10 years, I feel like there is more and more drivers of those return on investment conversations, at least internally. And I think all of those are very important. And what I have found is that very often an engineering department or your OT department or your IT department struggle with understanding why the ROI conversation is important to the business, to be able to go articulate those conversations, to be able to go articulate that for a project in order to be successful for the project. And I would almost say, if our listeners take one thing from this conversation, ask why. Ask why. Sometimes ask why lots and lots of times. If you ask it to different people in different meetings, you're almost guaranteed to have completely different answers. Completely different answers. But I do also really appreciate your comment the understanding what the company's North Star is, whether North Star for the project, and that may be reducing downtime or increasing quality, or North Star for the organization, which could be, going and creating cases or pallets of your product and doing that in the most efficient way possible through these, well, KPIs probably also don't exist, but that's not something that we have to talk about here on this conversation. I do want to go ask and kind of dig in a little bit more about the positioning, right? And so you had mentioned when you and Glenn started Abelara, your thought it was mostly on the consulting side. So can you talk a little bit more about why you wanted to go into that and where you think the gap in the market is? I mean, I think it still is, but why you think the gap in the market is there and exists? And then maybe we can go ahead and expand into what you're doing on the integration side, please.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was driven by two things. The first one just being that I was burnt out on the true integration side personally, right? And when you're starting a company, it's me, it's Glenn, the co-founder, and the first couple employees from there. But you're doing a lot of things yourself in those first months, in that first year, right? Before you can scale the team and really get it going from there. And being that I was the primary technical person, so if we were going to do an integration project, it was going to be me, and I was looking to do things that I enjoyed more. And that's the personal side of it. It was less of a market gap. It was less. There's reasons we did the research. We did it smart. Don't worry. We didn't just dive into something with no reason. But a lot of it was driven by that. But then the other side of that is when I was an integrator, thinking back on the things that burnt me out in the first place. Yeah. So what went wrong on every project? What always affected the scope? What always affected the budget? What changed things to make things go sideways that made it stressful for me in the first place? And not only what made it stressful for me, but what made it stressful for my team, what made it stressful for my managers, what made it stressful for our customers and their employees, everything from the operator to the owner of the companies we were working for to the same thing inside of my own team, right? And all of our guys. And with that, there was a lot of introspection on a lot of like a decade or two, a decade plus of past projects, right? And how do we kind of find the root cause of where do things go right, where do things go wrong? Based on our really impressive case studies, why did that one go well, right? Yep. But then why did these other projects go a little bit sideways? Like the outcome always ended up well, the customers were always happy, but it was some projects were really stressful to get there for everybody. Yep. And some projects were just a breeze. They were fun, they were easy. And so there's a lot of dissecting the root cause of those, right? And you're already hearing me get into some of the consultant side of here, talking about root cause on projects and retrospectives and things like that. But that's what led to it all. And a lot of the things that led to it weren't something that we could fix as a true integrator, right? Okay. The decisions have already been made by the time the client calls the integrator in. They already have something that they want to build, may or may not be the right thing to build, but that's not the integrator's choice anymore because it's so far down the road, right? You've got some engineering firms that come in and do your design build. They pass it up to integrators. Some of them are the integrator, but that project life cycle, the integrator is almost always brought in too late. Yeah. If they're that broad strokes integrator, which we always were, right? It was how do things work together? If you're the point integrator where I work with this platform and I do it really well, then you're brought in at just the right time. But the problem is a lot of the market treated all integrators as that, right? Yep. They've already decided we're going to use this platform, we're going to do it in this way, and we want this outcome, even when doing that platform in that way is guaranteed to not lead to that outcome, but they don't want to hear it anymore because they're so far down the process. So how do we get in front of that? And that's kind of what led to the consulting piece. And we'll walk that back a little bit before I keep going there because it's a funny story. We had a sales guy who I worked with a lot, and depending on the client, they either wanted me in that meeting up front on the sales side or they didn't. And the question was why? Well, the answer was, I would always ask why. Hey, we want to automate this thing. We want to put cameras on this machine to be able to do this thing. And my answer was always, well, why do you want to do that? This is the outcome we're trying to get. All right, but that will lead to this part of the outcome for 10 times the cost. Or if this is the outcome you're trying to get, here's the answer that will leave doors open to scale later and get you to a bigger one later and be cheaper now. But Some clients like those conversations. It saves them time. It saves them money. They can go through. And other clients were so far down that path, they just didn't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And when you're working with the sales guy, they either want you to be there to help close the sale or they don't want you there at all. So that was kind of the piece there. But in those meetings, even in the sales side, it was always, we want you to build this for this facility or this machine or this line. And my first question was always, well, why did you choose that? Why did you choose this site? Why did you choose this machine? Why did you choose this platform? Let's get the context here. And when we had people who would at least humor me on that, even if they didn't quite understand where I was going, they were able to verbalize things that they may or may not have already discussed internally. And some clients did, don't get me wrong. Some people already did all the due diligence and they had answers for everything. And a lot of them didn't. It was, well, we use this platform here and it worked for this thing, so of course it's going to work for that. Or this is the machine we wanted to do because it's the one we bought most recently, or it's the one that the operator said doesn't work well. Well, why doesn't it work well? We don't know yet. Things like that. And the level of effort that had gone into picking it was vast. Some did really good due diligence and they knew exactly what they wanted and why. And others were just throwing money at a problem that may or may not work out without really understanding what that meant. So how do we get in front of that? We find the people who don't throw, who either aren't going to do that due diligence or want help with that due diligence where they know they need it. And the best clients on the consulting side that we've worked with are the ones who know they need to do that due diligence. They want to work with it. They've got a big project and they want to make sure it's going to go smoothly. So they'll spend that time up front to plan it so they can meet their deadline, that they're not hit with 20 change orders or they don't get a platform that was put in that wasn't really made for what they wanted to do. And that's kind of where that consulting side came in, was where did all these projects go sideways? How do we fix it? And I'm not going to fix it by writing code in a PLC or integrating to the ERP. We're going to fix it on the change management and the business side and the planning before we ever get 20 steps before we ever get to that point, right? And that's kind of what led us into more of that consulting role, was just how do we find things and how do we fix them?
Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that, Dylan, because I feel like I've said some similar things and Vlad has probably heard me say some similar things enough times. As I have told you before the stream, it's nice to know that I'm not perhaps as crazy as I think I might be when you're saying all of those things to yourself. And so Vlad is, so for our podcast listeners, Vlad is actively like shaking his head somewhere between no and yes, Dave, you're crazy, but you may not necessarily be incorrect in this at the moment. So I really appreciate that. I will only add kind of one more train of thought in what I have experienced on the consulting side before we go talk about the integration work that you're doing, is that many times I've been in too many of those conversations, probably similar to you, Dylan, in which things were decided, right? We're using this platform, or we've already purchased $30,000 in cameras and we're using the $30,000 in cameras, when a $200 sensor would go get you exactly well, maybe not exactly, but would go get you the exact pieces of information that you need in order to be successful with this project. But because we've already spent the money, because we had these conversations, or we saw the new shiny thing, we're already so far down this road. What I have found is that oftentimes, and longtime listeners of the show have heard me say this, oftentimes some of the best clients are the ones that have tried and failed several times, have realized that they cannot be as successful as they want to internally, or they've tried and failed at other businesses in other verticals, and are willing to go listen to the outside expertise and help before they start planning the project and buy the shiny new toys and commit themselves down a path of uncertainty.
Yep. And I think on top of that too, I want to go back to that camera example. The $200 camera might do the job, but they bought $30,000 worth of camera. But the one thing I've learned, so 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it was always, well, why would you ever do that? The $200 camera is awesome. It's an engineer. It's a technical solution. It's going to work. But there are so many reasons why that $30,000 camera might actually be the best decision. And maybe it's a known quantity. It's safe. It's less risky. Maybe they already have an account with them and it's one less vendor they want to manage. Sometimes it's a pre-existing relationship or something. You don't really have a choice, but there are reasons why you might make the wrong technical decision, but it's still the right decision for the business. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
biggest thing, pulling the threads. Early in my career as an engineer, I probably would have yelled at you for even suggesting that. It's heresy. Like, the technical answer is the technical answer. Let's make it work.
Yep.
But over the years, especially as we start analyzing these projects, everything's a trade-off. And it might be technically worse, but it's better for the outcome in the business we're looking for. And everything just boils down to what are those trade-offs.
Absolutely. Vlad?
Yeah, and look, I think it's interesting to also hear you say, Dylan, but also to reflect, on some of the past experiences. I think that the general flaw of a typical systems integrator is that it's very technology focused, right? And maybe that's why you've mentioned the consulting portion, which I at least would classify in general, right? Obviously, it depends is the answer, but it is a lot more focused on the human and the problem side for the specific customers. So I think there needs to be a blend of the two, regardless of how you market and label yourself. But ultimately, I think as you grow in your career in general, right, not you specifically, but as an engineer in our space, you realize that you cannot just throw technology at these problems. A lot of the challenges are organizational. It could be, again, with training materials. And like I said, I say this with somewhat of a smirk because I'm also thinking back on some of the initiatives where, the manufacturer had best-in-class technology, but they still, in many instances, failed to realize the gains of some of those tools because they either lack the training, lack the approach, right? And the analogy I would give is if you get a Fitbit or a watch that measures, your blood pressure and all of those things, if you don't put in the work, it is impossible to see any results, right? So,
right.
But anyways, I guess like moving us forward on the integration side and having all of this maybe hindsight knowledge now, how do you approach integration projects, right? Like, do you have some kind of a maybe framework that you typically work with the customers? How would you maybe advise a general systems integrator approach customer engagements? I'm curious to maybe hear how you're talking from the initial phase to maybe that design phase to having those difficult conversations as to what should happen before you start mitigating through change orders.
Yeah, I think the first thing for us is before we even quote a project, if we're not doing the consulting side of it, if we're not figuring out the architecture, we're not helping them come to what is that project, before we can quote a project without that, we need to have a clear scope of work for said project. So if we don't have a clear scope of work to bid on, to write a proposal to, then we're probably just going to decline to bid that one. Or we're going to recommend the consulting services to get to that scope of work. There are some jobs we lose because of that, and in our opinion, that's fine. We may or may not have too tight of a net, and we kind of tune that over time. But it's just kind of all about it's about having that defined scope of work up front, right? And a lot of people have that, and a lot of people don't. So if they have a clear scope of work and they have a clearly defined outcome, then we can do just regular old school integration. Let's build the system for you, especially if it's in our wheelhouse. So yeah.
Let me ask you a dangerous question on that front. I guess, how clear does this, are you able to describe how clear a scope of work needs to be? Because even to be honest with you, I'm struggling sometimes with that question, right? Because as you know, our industry is just, sometimes you have a one pager, we roughly know what's gonna need to be built, but we hope that you can bid this out as an entire project and eat the losses if it goes sideways, right? So I'm curious, how do you define good enough scope of work?
I mean, what is the outcome? I mean, it's a gray area. There's not a hard set rule. It's something that as we scale as an integrator, we're going to have to start standardizing on and finding a rule for. But at this stage in our business, a lot of it's just past experiences. I've seen projects work well with various scopes of work and where they go wrong and all of that. One of the things for us is when there's not a very clear scope of work, we work a lot with the customers on budgetary numbers. I always err on the all-in cost. So you've got your project with a rough scope of work, but maybe not a defined outcome yet, right? So let's work with you on the budgetary numbers. Let's see what it's going to cost and see where that gets you, and we can start having that conversation a little bit as we go forward. The other one is sometimes it is good enough. We just have to take the leap and do it. And that's where we'll just make our assumptions. We'll write the proposals. We'll put in proper exclusions and assumptions and things like that, and very clearly communicate those up front to avoid surprises. And just be very honest and transparent about it throughout the process is kind of our biggest thing. So the secret I do, this is kind of the secret sauce a little bit on my method of defining that, is I'll always ask before a proposal, what does done look like when we're talking about a potential project? And you'd be surprised how many people don't have an answer for that. But then we can start walking it through. Well, you asked for this, you asked for that. What does it look like when it's done? And once you can answer what it looks like when it's done in some capacity, we usually have enough to go from there. And then it comes down to the delivery method and things like that. And we're not doing anything abnormal there. I mean, the actual execution delivery of an integrator and an integration project has been defined for multiple decades now. I mean, you've got CSAA documentation going back 20, 30 years probably, defining how to run a project. And we've done different variations on it over time. Various phases may or may not exist, but it's always kind of your phased approach of discovery and handoff and sales, discovery, handoff. You get your execution, you get through, you start building stuff, you do internal testing, you do simulation testing. Whether it's a building or a machine will depend on how you do FAT or not, SAT, things like that, and go through the project lifecycle from there. But that's a pretty well-defined process that has been defined for decades, and we have our own flavor of it. We do our own flair, and we're pretty flexible with the exact execution, but it always boils down to a very common structure. For actual integration projects, it's usually waterfall defined by the scope of work, maybe some agile loops built into there from that, but it's always kind of some hybrid there. But before we even get to that point, that's kind of the biggest thing for me, is just having a scope of work at all. But yeah,
I would say to scopes of work. I'm not sure I've ever met a scope of work that couldn't or shouldn't have been better. Inclusive of scopes of work that we've written, mostly for internally. Like, you can always write it better. I've seen everything from one page off of several $100,000 of project to 200 pages off of a couple $100 million worth of project, and there are always questions. There are always gaps.
Always.
The 40-second time, the 40-second time you read it, and then you read it. You write the proposal. You have someone come in with fresh eyes, and there's like a critical gap that you didn't answer because it wasn't brought up in the scope of work, and you're like, wow, how did dozens of people or 100 people miss this during the first several goes around? But I do like your point of Dylan, of being able to answer the question why and what does done look like. Maybe far too often. Go ahead.
Yeah, please. And with that, I mean, the big thing is there's always gaps. You're never going to get rid of those. You can try to cover both yourself and the client with well-bounded exclusions and assumptions and things like that you all agree on, but transparency and honesty and just communication throughout the project lifecycle is the important thing there. So if we're clear on the definition of step one and we're clear on the final deliverable, the gaps in the middle usually iron themselves out. Just unless there's too many, obviously. But you can have gaps in the middle as long as you know what the outcome is supposed to be. And then if things change, and they oftentimes do, especially on longer year-long projects or more, then you just have to be that transparent and that communication piece up there. I mean, it's little details if you're doing a SCADA system, is probably the easiest example. Do you give a wireframe of the user interface before you start programming every detail underneath it, right? Do you involve the operator, the end user, the manager, the general persona who's going to use that thing in the design process, or do you just tell them 6 months later, here's your thing? And things like that are usually how we can iron out a lot of those gaps in the middle, is just the very boring, contrived answer of communication and transparency. Just working with the customer and not just showing up with the potentially finished thing.
Dylan, allow me to ask you a follow-up on the communication piece, but in a slightly different direction, right? I find that one of the biggest bottlenecks, I would say individuals that go off on their own, at least in the early days face, is just being that sole lone wolf contractor as opposed to building the company, right? And obviously you're already over that bridge. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, having the conversation with the client as to bringing in employees, right? Obviously, everybody wants Dylan on their project. At some point, Dylan is unable to be at, 6 different factories in the same week.
What?
So
So disappointing.
I mean, maybe
Yeah,
if he takes the route of, very well on the flights, maybe, but
oh yeah.
How do you get there, right? Like, how do you get the blessing, I would say, from the customer to say, like, hey, Dylan, we're good with you bringing in these 1, 2, 3, or many other engineers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing there, again, just comes back to transparency, being open about it. I mean, never pull a bait and switch or anything like that. But I think that was part of us starting with the consulting leads to that naturally. So as Abelara, I've done very little of the actual integration work, right? So when we're doing the consulting stuff and we're doing more coaching and more training stuff, I'm a little bit more involved. Sales up front, in front of the projects, I'm a little bit more involved. But there's always been a clear handoff when it comes to the integration and the team. And I'm still behind the scenes. I'm still following up with people. I'm watching what they're doing. We're keeping up the quality. We're doing all that. But I think the biggest thing, and it feels like some big secret, but it's not. It's also hard to pull off. We found the right people and we got lucky in some aspects, is having the right people who can take that without the customer feeling, without that client feeling like I pulled off of the project, right? When we have people who are better at so we kind of discussed earlier how I go very broad, jack of all trades. I can tell you how 100, 200 different things work together. And I go deeper than most in maybe 2 or 3 of those, right? So that leaves 197, we'll say, areas where there are millions of people who are smarter than me in those specific domains, right? And when we're doing a project with a certain platform or we're doing a certain type of project, we've got people who are better than me at those specific tasks. So when we're putting people in front of the customer that are in upgrade, they're working with us and they're part of that project, they're part of that conversation. It's not, hey, you got the B team. It's, hey, here's the team that will really pull this off for you and work with you. And by the way, they're going to do it better than I did. And it's just setting expectations up front. But so from my personal standpoint, it's setting up expectations up front. We're never leading with, hey, you're going to get Dylan 100%. It's all Dylan. It's all Dylan. That would be ridiculous. There's no way to scale that. And we can work with maybe 3 customers at a time at most. But how do we work with more? How do we scale a business? How do we do the SI side? Going back to the topic of the theme here is how do we, on the systems integrator side, how do we replicate? How do we scale? How do we do more projects? And that's just how do you bring in the right people? It's hiring people who can execute the projects, hiring in people who won't leave people hanging, and will take care of the clients for you. So having good people helps a lot. And right now we've got a lot of good people.
Let me ask you a follow-up on that side, right? I think it's very topical for the systems integration theme. Again, I know a lot of people in our space obviously will contract out some of their services. And so then there becomes this maybe like balance, but also chicken or the egg situation where do we bring in contractors as part of this project? Obviously, there's going to be, how would I say, like different nuances associated with that, or do we hire them on board full time for that specific project? Could you talk about maybe on the personnel side, right? Like, did you start talking with these individuals and maybe explaining to them, hey, there's going to be a project in 6 months I'm working on? Like, could you talk about those dynamics of systems integration a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's just project management as a whole. I mean, it's just managing customer expectations, managing scopes, managing schedule and budget, and again, just being transparent with resourcing and things like that. I mean, it's forecasting your team, You've got a finite number of resources on a team. You can hire more people, but it takes this much time to ramp them up. And here's the sales funnel versus here's the resource allocation that we have internally. Here's the people that we have available to perform certain parts of projects or to run them. And keeping that funnel and that allocation balanced, and just knowing when to hire people. And everyone's going to make mistakes there. You always do. That's just the nature of the business. But it's that forecasting is kind of the big piece there. And then when do you outsource? When do you work with your own team? Just comes down to our skill sets, availability, things like that. And again, just never leading the customer on into a different outcome. So for example, with Abelara specifically, going back to some of the stuff that made projects not work very well in the past and just kind of why we exist in the first place is because we have multiple times already, when we bring in third parties, it's because there's somebody out there who's better at that specific task than we are. And if we're doing an integration on a project, there's somebody else out there that is that expert, that specialist in that one platform, right? We're going to bring them in instead of just pretending that we can do everything because we have our skill sets and they have theirs, right? How do we get the best team? How do we get the best platforms? And how do we do whatever we can to deliver the best outcome to that client? And sometimes that means bringing in third parties, like you said, right? Outsourcing parts of your integration project. And the biggest thing for me is just being honest about that. Like, we're going to show up with somebody from another company. They're not an Abelara employee. They're a subcontractor. We've got all the MSAs and legal stuff aside that we can, NDAs, all that kind of stuff is handled. But the biggest thing for me is just never pretending that they're an Abelara employee. That always backfires every time I've been on either side of that personally. So they're going to come in. I'm bringing in somebody from this other company. Here's why. Here's what they're going to do. Here's what they're really good at. Sometimes that's a subcontract through Abelara. Sometimes you just put them right in touch with that other company that can do that integration for them. Just depends on what that customer is looking for and what that client needs, right? But it just comes down to honesty and transparency. Like our desire is the best outcome for that client. And there's a lot of things that I believe we're the best answer for. And we know our limits. So when do we bring in other people? Maybe we just need more people to throw at a project to get a task done faster. That's a good reason to bring people in. We're just going to be open and honest about it. We're never going to hide that fact. Maybe it is that we're doing something slightly outside of our wheelhouse or something we don't want to take the risk on. So we'll bring in somebody else for that. But we'll always be open about why we're bringing people in, explaining it and introducing it and where they're from. And yeah, it comes down to that. So from a client-facing perspective, it's all about just being transparent with it. Who are you bringing in and why and when? And on the SI side of this, it's just that forecasting piece. We've got so many projects to do, and we've got so many resources that can do them with differing levels of skill sets. And where do the pieces fall on the board? And sometimes you need extra help.
I love that, Dylan, in large part because you made forecasting seem so much easier than it ever is. As most operational folks that I know like to say, there are only two truths about forecasting. You're either way high or way low. You're almost never perfect. I'm not sure you're ever perfect, especially when it comes to forecasting projects. Projects all have their own schedule. They never like to wait. And as soon as we decide it's time to go, everyone else should also be ready. They in fact, should have been ready and waiting for months ahead of the go time. So that would be a whole series of 8 more 2-hour podcasts apiece. So
at least.
I do want to go ask a little bit on the first hire, right? And so I know that you've got at least 2 people on the systems integrator side currently at Abelara. I guess take us through kind of those first couple of hires. When you realized it was time to go make those hires, maybe what that process looked like a little bit. If someone is out there and perhaps on the fence or waffling over, does it make sense to go make the hire, or does it make sense to hold off and try to still do all the work ourselves, or go bring in some additional contractors before making the hire?
Yeah, I mean, that's just scaling the business. So it's just like, I mean, if we're talking on the OT side, any of the operations guys, they'll know process optimization, line optimization, finding the bottlenecks, right? So when it's just the two of us, myself and my co-founder, it's what are the bottlenecks? We got two people. One person has these set of tasks. One person has these. We mix in the middle. You start to have this blend of in the business and on the business. And you try to divvy up your time in ways that make sense to keep the projects flowing in. Early on our side, it was mostly consulting, but any integrator is going to face the same problems, right? And so finding the bottlenecks, finding the gaps in our skill sets, in our personal skill sets, or in our availability. I think that's the thing that gets missed the most is the availability side of it. There are a lot of things that both myself and my co-founder, Glenn, love doing, are really good at, but we don't have time to do it while also running the business. So you need to hire some of those things as well. And sometimes that's probably the hardest thing to get over emotionally when you're scaling the business is letting go of the things that you genuinely enjoy and letting go of the things that you're good at and hiring people who might be 80, 90% as good as you are at it. They might be 50%. They might be better than you. But any of those figures are hard. If someone's better than you, now you have to come to terms and admit that. If they're not performing as well as you have to say, is it good enough? And it's hard to reconcile that for a lot of people, myself included at times. But it's all about the gaps and the bottlenecks. So for us, it's what do we need to do to keep the business moving, especially in the early days when it's two founders, we don't have employees yet. What do we need to grow the business? Where are we trying to go? And what's in our way from getting there? So early on, I think this is unique to us, maybe not every SI, but early on, I was doing most of the consulting, most of the technical engagements. And then I was also doing a lot of the marketing as well. So early on, we brought somebody in to help out with some sales and marketing tasks, which allowed me to free up time to do a lot more of that project work, right? And then over time, now we had more projects, we had more consulting engagements. I could only be on so many meetings and in so many plants and at so many conferences at the same time, right? So now I'm becoming the bottleneck in the critical line of projects. So now we need to bring somebody in who can really do projects and stuff too. And even if I enjoy it, that's the stuff that I just shouldn't be doing for the sake of the business because it's bigger than me, right? And so that's when we brought in who would become our director of engineering, Dan. And he came in and did a lot of the project work. He took over a lot of the consulting stuff. He took over a lot of the integration work, a lot of the project stuff. So then I could start focusing much more on the strategy, the relationships, the sales, things like that, right? To keep the business moving so that we have stuff coming in to scale. Then he started hiring some engineers to offload his own plate as well, right? So now we hired him. He offloaded time and capacity off of me so I could do the things the business needs. And then eventually he gets that capacity. So now we need to do the gap analysis to find the bottlenecks. Where does he need help? He hires in a couple more engineers and we get an incredible team of senior engineers. Now we need to figure out, do we need junior engineers? Do we need mid-level engineers? How many projects need leads? Things like that. And that just keeps cascading for basically forever. And then the next one from there is Glenn on that side of things. What are his bottlenecks? He's doing a lot of the day-to-day operations, the finance, the HR, all the paperwork and the legal and all that kind of stuff. And where does he need help, right? So we bring in a salesman to offload a lot of the time. It might be things he's good at. It's things he's really good at. It's things he enjoys doing, but it's where most of his time is spent, right? And how do we free up the majority amount of time so that we don't become a bottleneck in other parts of the business? So then we bring on a full-time salesman and a full-time sales lead, not only to offload our time, but what we were doing in 30% of our time, now we have a full-time person doing. And that allows us to keep the forecast and that pipeline going so that as we're making these hires on the engineering side, we know we have the capacity and we're doing so responsibly because we can then make sure their time is filled even after that first project is done, right? So it's all about finding the bottlenecks, figuring out where the capacity is, and maximizing it. It's really no different than process optimization in operations.
I love that, Dylan. You've once again made it seem so much easier than any reality that I have ever personally experienced. And I want to leave it that way. I want to make everyone listening to Manufacturing Hub on this first episode of Building a Systems Integrator listen and hear how easy the theoretical how easy it could be. And I absolutely love that. Vlad, do you want to go ask Dylan about his predictions of the future of integration? Or do you want to go dig in and destroy his just go hire to solve some bottlenecks theory.
No, I am curious on what your thoughts are on the future of systems integration, and I would say to an extent of consulting, right? And the reason, of course, why, or maybe the primary reason why, is there's been some, how would I say it, debates around AI sort of shrinking the gap that integrators help with, right? And again, we're talking about accelerating, let's put it this way, the development of that middleware, if you will, or the connection between systems for which integrators were traditionally building a lot of hours, right? So I guess with that in mind, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where integration is going. Is it going to collapse? And everyone's just going to be a Claude Code bot at the terminal, or if it's going to be something else, or it's going to remain the same, just I don't know, maybe with shorter timelines on the projects.
Yeah, the brief answer is I think it mostly stays the same, but staying the same I think is a caveat. Integration is integrating systems and processes, right? A lot of systems integrators over the last 10, 15 years have gotten very deep into programming, more so than integration. You've got 400 or 500 people in a company that know one or two ecosystems or platforms really well. And instead of integrating systems, now they're programmers, they're coders. They're just programmers within a specific set of tools. And I think what's going to happen with AI is integration and integrators as a business goes back to kind of what it was originally intended to be, genuine integration. They're not custom coders. There will be some code always that's going to be needed to integrate systems, but it's not going to be integrators building full platforms from scratch. It's not going to be full MES systems built in a platform fully from scratch for a client every single time over and over. I think some of that is coming back to the original where it was. So we always had this build versus buy debate in the last 5 years, 10 years. And we've always had some level of it, but we're so far at either extreme right now where the reality is mostly in the middle ground. You're going to buy some, you're going to integrate some, and yeah, you might build some things here and there. But most of what you're building is the integrations. And a lot of people are going very heavily into the build territory, not even before AI, before all the efficiencies, not really knowing what that would entail. It's easy to build something that does a thing. It's hard to maintain it. It's hard to build it so it's resilient. Failover, like you can buy a SCADA system with failover, but if you build one from scratch, what happens when it goes out? And does it take 6 hours to get back online because you have to find all your services? Or does it just come back up when the computer reboots? There's those little details of a product and a platform that you don't get when you build if you don't build it in yourself. And a lot of people miss the complexity. Like building a tool that connects to a PLC, pulls data up and pipes it to the cloud is simple. Building a tool that does that 24/7, 365 days a year, reliably, safely, and securely is hard. And I think with AI, it's widening that gap. And my personal opinion, that's probably wrong because every prediction on a podcast is wrong at some point. But my prediction that's probably going to be wrong is that it goes back to those first principles. It goes back to integrating systems and a lot less custom code. And I think we're through there. A lot of the integrators that started as integrators that went to custom code, there's a lot of companies out there that are those experts in a platform where their whole, once you get to a certain size, their mission has kind of changed to how do we integrate systems and help the customer to how do we keep, and I mean, there's fiduciary duty and things like that. It's not even wrong of them, right? But then once you get to a certain scale, especially when you're the specialist selling hours, where your mission is now how do we keep our 400 employees employed and fed and happy? How do we keep the projects coming in to fulfill those hours? And we start to get bloat. You start to get people estimating projects at 2-3 times the hours it would take because they need to keep people busy, right? And I think that style of integration is going to go back to reality a little bit later on. I think we just go back to what integration was always supposed to be. Integration just becomes integration again because it's all about it's less about the code you write, or it's even less about the platforms you choose, but it's about how do you integrate it as the domain knowledge And AI can help with some of that, and it can write a lot of the code really easy. But the domain knowledge, the trade-offs, making those decisions are always going to be nuanced. And maybe someday AI gets good enough where an LLM can tell you some of that stuff. Maybe we get AGI, but probably not anytime soon. And I think we just go back to humans making the decisions, integrating, and the nuance, where the things that AI is disrupting are the things that integrators probably really shouldn't have been doing in the first place, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very interesting out there, right? Like being staffed on some of the projects right now and seeing the approach, I would say, that different, not only integrators, right, but specific individuals take when it comes to AI.
Right.
There's obviously the very cautious type where they may query some simple things with Copilot or ChatGPT, and then there's some that almost swear by the fact that they can rebuild any MES, SCADA, or whatever else software, within a weekend. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure where we will be in 3 to 5 years. What I do sense, right, general kind of like gut feeling, is that there's a lot of false confidence coming from at least, people that have built, let's say, websites, or I would say like very traditional like software type of applications that come into our field. Again, you could argue maybe it's because of the layoffs or because there's just different sorts of opportunities here. But it seems to feel like they think, well, you can just build this application and everything is going to be great because it runs, inside of a Docker container somewhere on the cloud. So therefore, it must meet the same exact specs as, again, a SCADA and an MES. And like for me, the example, and I know you've mentioned this a little bit, Dylan, on the PLC side, I had an obvious kind of example where someone was building a Shopify type of a website. This was outside of manufacturing, right? And obviously, yes, like AI can build you a nice, even CMS, a nice UI, a nice layout. But what people don't think about in those instances, it's the payment gateways, is how do you process, credit cards securely. And the same applies in manufacturing. For those, again, that haven't learned that lesson, is that you can pull the data, right? But again, they probably haven't seen the scale of an enterprise where all of that is going to crumble unless you utilize a purposefully built solution, right? Like it is just, it's night and day.
LLMs have made code easy to write, but products are still hard to build and own and maintain.
Absolutely. What we have found is that senior folks who are SMEs and understand product and understand the landscape are able to do an exponential amount of additional work. And I think there is the large gap of everyone else that is not an SME and doesn't understand how these things are supposed to go together, that are going to waste a lot of tokens and build a lot of junk. But that may be that may be the big opportunity coming up. Dylan, this has been amazing. I'm sure we will go continue this conversation with you again soon. But before we let you go, we want to ask you all of the awesome questions we get to ask all of our guests. The first one, as longtime listeners of the show will know, is one of my favorite. It's the predict the future. And I feel like you've done a really good job of predicting integration going back into being actual integration. But I want to get your thoughts on the landscape of systems integrators, right? Do you imagine we're going to see a lot of smaller integrators who are very focused in niche? Do you imagine a lot of those smaller and medium-sized integrators are going to go get eaten up into a couple of even bigger conglomerates? What do you think the physical landscape of integrators is going to look like?
I think over a large enough period, it's going to go right back to where it is. I mean, you're still going to have your large integrators. You're still going to have your small integrators. I don't think much honestly changes at the end of the day from a macro view. That said, and without naming names, obviously, there has been, anecdotally, there's been a lot more acquisitions and things like that of systems integrators in the last year or two than there's ever been precedent for. And there are a lot of smaller and mid-sized ones that are being acquired and combined into larger ones. That's slightly unprecedented in the SI side of things. That hasn't happened very often in the past, at least not at the scale and the quantity that's happening right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I do think a lot of that's AI, right? If you look at Silicon Valley, you see a lot of the startups, everybody's trying to get into manufacturing as the use case for AI. So I think eventually once that pool dries up, I think we go right back to where it was. And I think that's a temporary blip on a much larger timeline. But again, who knows?
Okay. I like it. I suppose that is the third option of the two that I thought you were going to go pick. So I always appreciate the predict the future outside the box. So thank you for that, Dylan. Next up, I'd like to ask for some career advice. And typically, and you've given us some career advice for like technical folks, early to mid career. But I'd love for you to, looking back on the last 18 months or the last 10 years of your career, having gained the technical expertise and then gone out to start a consultancy and systems integrator. If someone is listening and thinking, maybe I too want to be a systems integrator, what's the best piece of advice you have for them?
If somebody wants to be a systems integrator, I think it would be get ready to not be the integrator. So if you want to start an SI, you're not going to be the integrator. Like you might, if you're an SI and you want to build an integrator and you're going to have 2 or 3 employees, you're going to do regional work, then you're going to still be in a technical role. But if you want to build an integrator and scale it, within a year or two, you're not going to be an integrator anymore yourself as a person, right? You'll have integrators, your company will be an integrator, you'll have integrators on the team, you'll have engineers. But if you're getting if you want to start an SI to do engineering work, I probably wouldn't start an SI. Because it's going to be admin work. It's running the business. It's management. It's sales. It's marketing. It's all the HR and hiring. And if you're trying to scale a systems integrator and build a larger team, you're not going to be a technical person anymore, and you have to be ready for that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I see a lot of people, really, really good engineers, and some of them end up being successful and some don't. But a lot of people are surprised at how little engineering they do once they start running the SI, once they start building the company.
Once you start running a business, you are, and growing the business, you are not in that elbows deep into PLC grime sort of life anymore. Vlad is listening because he is actually elbows deep in PLC grime this week. And that was not a dig or anything like that at you, Vlad.
No.
That was a factual comment and I appreciate that was a great piece of advice, Dylan.
Oh yeah. And you always need to get back into it. Don't ever leave it completely, but it's not going to be your day to day.
Absolutely. And I know a number of people who have struggled to go scale past a certain point because they still wanted to do the technical work and were therefore the bottleneck, to your earlier comments. They were therefore the bottleneck in all of the processes of the organization because everything had to run through them and they were unwilling to go give up different areas and different sections of that. Next up, I think you've got a book recommendation for us. What book are you going to give us this week? Oh, Dylan, we have somehow lost your audio.
Better?
Oh, that's a different microphone than you were on, but it's going to work. Yeah.
Okay, that'll work. Yeah, I think I've already given some recommendations on past episodes here, so I'll go a little bit into right field. I think one book that I think any integrator should read, especially people who are in the field or doing on-site work, is Impro. It's improvisation in the theater. It has nothing to do with anything technical, but it talks a lot about how to communicate with people. It talks a lot about stature. It talks a lot about how to communicate with various people in different positions. And it's just a really good book on communication, especially in the field when you're going to meet people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, varying levels of ego, attitude, and skill set. And it's just a good book to learn how to communicate.
Okay. I love that. It's not very often that we get a completely brand new book, and I think that is a brand new book. So thank you for that. For our listeners at home and our listeners on the podcast, Vlad is going to go grab that book and he'll go drop it in the show notes because he is absolutely awesome doing all of those. Next up, Dylan, we'd like to ask for like an interesting idea or innovation, and this is how we've been phrasing it, right? Let's say a guy, his name is Vlad, comes to work for you tomorrow at Abelara. And he says, okay, Dylan, I'm here. I'm settled in. Which direction what should I go work on?
I would normally put somebody towards finding the patterns in various platforms. I mean, integrators, as I said earlier, are about integrating things. So how do you integrate systems with other systems? And what are the different patterns for integration? So I would usually send people towards whatever tool they want to use, whether it's raw code or some integration platform. But I would send them towards something that lets them play with those connections. How do I connect A to B? How do I connect A to B and C? And just get experience in connecting systems and platforms in ways that you haven't before. I don't really care what protocol it is. I don't care what platform you're using, but what are the first principles? How do you make this connection? What does this mean, right? And what are the patterns?
So we're creating a standard. We're creating some kind of a standard to connect different platforms together.
I wouldn't even use the word standard. I would just get experience. Just start connecting things. If that's using a big integration platform that you happen to have in your business, Boomi, Workato, things like that, or if it's just something simple and open source, N8N or Node-RED or custom code you write, but just get in the habit of connecting APIs and platforms together. How do you pull data off a PLC and get it to a database? How do you get data from that database to 5 different platforms? And spin things up and try them out and figure it out kind of from there, and less about standards and just more getting practice on the integrations.
Absolutely. But before we open this up for your last comments and questions for the listeners, we do have a comment from Frank Lamb, a longtime friend of the show. Frank says, the Phantom Palette, great read, especially pay attention to Frank, the real hero. I love that, Frank. I love that, Frank. And we almost forgot to go plug the book, Dylan. So we'll go ahead and plug the book, The Phantom Palette. I have only heard and had positive reviews from everyone I know who has read it. I am sure there's a link somewhere. We will go ahead and also drop that link in the show notes and in the show notes and on the live after, if someone is somehow managed not to find or read The Phantom Palette. So again, thank you so much for that, Frank. Dylan, last question to you is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Very much your open platform for anything that you would like to say or ask.
Yeah, I'm not the sales guy, so there's probably a better plug here, but if you need help, reach out. If you need help figuring out how to integrate stuff or how to put architecture together and how to get started, we're here to help as needed. So less about how can you help us, and if you need help or have something you need to figure out, let us know and we'll see if we can help.
Awesome. Dylan, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us as always. We will see you at ICC, and we'll hopefully get you on the same side of the camera as opposed to 16 different cameras from several different time zones. But we'll see you at ICC, and we're very much looking forward to that. For everyone at home, thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been episode 1 of the theme talking about building a systems integrator. We have at least 3 more episodes of these coming up, and I am super excited about that. Beyond that, we've got a bunch of content coming out on the Automate side from our friends and sponsors at Horner Automation and Siemens. Awesome conversations. If you guys haven't caught those, please go ahead and take a listen. We will have full episodes coming out on the channel soon, shortly, within the next couple of weeks. Beyond that, Vlad and I are at ICC, so if you guys are going to be at the Ignition Community Conference, give us a yell. Let us know you're going to be there. And we will go get to see you guys in like 5 short weeks, which is absolutely crazy. We will be streaming. I don't know how much we'll be streaming because I have a presentation and Vlad has a presentation, and it's going to be an absolutely crazy week. But we will be streaming, so you guys will see us at least once live during the week of the show, which is really awesome. And then we will be back in Chicago at PAC Expo in like 2 months. Yeah, in like just over 2 months in Chicago, the 18th through 21st of October. If you guys have made it this far, please make sure that you're following Dylan and Abelara. Please make sure that you're following Manufacturing Hub as well as Vlad and myself on LinkedIn and across all of your social platforms. If you made it this far on YouTube or if you made it this far in the podcast format, you guys are absolutely awesome. When I say thank you and remind Vlad to go drop the episodes on Thursday mornings, he does, and you guys listen to him on Thursdays, and it's absolutely fantastic because more of you listen. Until next